The woman who entered as an undocumented immigrant became a citizen and now wants a seat in the Congress on this edition of PoliticKIng. PoliticKIng. I'm Laura Schwartz in for Larry King. This week, the Trump administration laid out a tougher approach to illegal immigration than the Obama White House did before, as told through a pair of enforcement memos from the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security. Now, the enforcement guidelines include proposals to send immigrants who have crossed the border to Mexico, even if they're not Mexican, jail and prosecute more people who've crossed the border illegally, allow local police agencies and jailers to act as immigration agents and enforce federal policy, and stop providing some legal protections to child immigrants caught crossing the border. So what does this all mean for the estimated 11 million immigrants presently living right here in the country undocumented? We're going to start there with someone who was brought into America as a toddler by her parents and didn't discover as she was undocumented until her teens. She went on to become an American citizen as well as an immigration activist, a journalist, and now a candidate for California's 34th Congressional District. She is Wendy Carrillo, and she joins me on set. Wendy, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
You must have quite a reaction to those memos detailed from the Department of Homeland Security this week with the tougher enforcement measures. What are you hearing from the community that you hope to represent?
The community is incredibly scared at the moment, but this isn't anything new. We've been seeing it through the previous administration, and now it's heightened. So for those that are just joining the immigration rights movement, this has been an issue that has been felt for many, many years, and now we're feeling it on a much higher scale. But I think now more than ever, undocumented communities are rallying up together across the nation, and allies as well, to ensure that this president does not violate civil rights, does not violate the Constitution, and that really ensures that children and those that are coming from countries facing incredible violence actually seek refuge. And so there are many of us that are involved in this movement that want to ensure that families are not separated, that children are being advocated for, that a 4-year-old does not have to defend his or herself in front of a judge as to why they came to this country in the first place. There's so many issues and so many layers to this movement that we must recognize.
Well, and you call it a movement, and the movement's been going on for many years, but this really gives a whole new platform for almost a revitalization. You seem to have more people involved than ever, because this is something that you've followed your entire life. Do you think this is a new stepping point for the immigration issue and people being involved?
I think this is an opportunity for everyday Americans to get involved in the immigrants' rights movement and to understand what a pathway to citizenship looks like. So when we talk about immigration, we must first understand American foreign policy and the impact that we have all across the world. When we talk about Salvadorian children fleeing war and violence like myself that are leaving this country, that are leaving a country that out of every 100,000 people, there are 92 homicides. It is the homicide capital of the world. And so when we don't take those things into account as to why people migrate, why people leave their country, why people choose to put their life in danger to seek a better life somewhere else, then we are missing an opportunity to truly connect the dots of what's happening in Central America, what's happening in Syria, why we have Syrian refugees, why there's a crisis in the Mediterranean. These are all interconnected things that ultimately have a lot to do with American foreign policy.
That's really an interesting relationship between the two. And do you see that what you would bring to Congress would be the foreign policy aspect, the immigration? I know you have many platforms within your campaign, but do you really see immigration as where you'd want to make the most of an impact?
There are many issues that are incredibly important, whether they're jobs and a living wage and health care and immigration and the education. These are all interconnected. So the moment that we start talking about intersectionality, when we start putting all these themes in order as to why they're important and ultimately lead to the importance of having a good economy, these are all issues and themes that are part of a wheelhouse. And so all of them are important, but specifically right now in this moment in time, we must make the connection as to why these matter and to why immigration is such a vital part of our American thread, of our history in this country. And so it is a major part of my platform and why I'm running.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security says there are not going to be mass roundups for deportation. Do you believe that? Is the community really concerned about the mass roundups? And by the way, do you have anyone in your family that could be affected by that?
The Department of Homeland Security can say one thing and actually do another, and we're clearly seeing that. In 30 days, we've already seen 700 people rounded up. This is not the first time that the American government has done this. I mean, there was an operation called Operation Wetback that did this exact same thing, and we think about it like it didn't happen. We did it for Japanese Americans in internment camps. We continue to see it in detention centers where women and children and men are being placed in cages as if they were animals. There are many people in the community that I come from that are at risk. Luckily, my family is safe, but there are neighbors that aren't. And if I were to say, well, this doesn't impact me, and so I shouldn't care, then we lose the ideals and values that we hold as a country.
Now, President Obama was known as the deporter-in-chief. You know, he had record high numbers. In 2013, he deported a record high of 434,000 illegal immigrants. So how is really what the Trump administration is doing that much different than what President Obama's just been doing for the last 8 years?
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to defend in any which way President Obama. It's been one of the harshest things and a stain on his legacy. The difference is that it was never done through a channel or a rhetoric of hate. It was never done through, you are Mexican, you're a rapist. It was never done on a platform which singled out a community based on where they're from or based on the religion that they had. So the Muslim ban, this continued conversation about deporting people back to Mexico, even though they are not Mexican, is a problem that the president has that he needs to address full on. And it includes the base of people that support him based on xenophobia, nationalism, and misogyny, all these other things that we can talk about that actually make the base of his supporters.
What about the children? You know, the Department of Homeland Security said that DACA would be intact for now, which of course protects the children that have been brought here illegally. You would have fallen under DACA yourself. Where do you see that standing? Do you believe that they will keep DACA intact, or is that up for grabs?
DACA is a result of a failed Congress in passing the DREAM Act after 9/11, which would have provided a pathway to citizenship
for those children,
for undocumented young people that came into this country with a cap at age. So DACA is something that I lobbied very heavily for, that a lot of immigrant rights groups lobbied very heavily for. And now, unfortunately, there is a registry of young people in this country that are seeking better opportunities, going to college, wanted to join the military, that now can be found. And so it is my ultimate goal to ensure that these young people feel safe in the country that they've known, that they've grown up in, and ensure that they are protected against any type of deportation. And President Trump hasn't said anything on this yet, but you know, you just never know. It's a matter of time.
You'll be watching that closely, I can imagine. Yes. Now, there have been anti-Trump demonstrations nearly every day since President Trump has been in office. And we talked about movements growing and people getting involved that perhaps weren't involved before. What do you think about the reaction of the Democratic Party leadership? Because, of course, you're running as a Democrat. What do you think about the reaction of the Democratic leadership to these protests? Do they really get what's going on?
I think the Democratic Party for a long time has been incredibly disconnected to the realities that everyday Americans face in this country. The fact that we have to lobby and call 50,000 times a senator from a state of California to say no to Jeff Sessions is irresponsible. It is dangerous. And it shows a lack of connection. The fact that Democrats need to take a poll to understand where the American people are or how we feel about certain issues, and the fact that they haven't shown up to places where they're being asked to show up tells you how disconnected they are. So not only is the next step in my congressional race to be in the first race in the entire country, the first response to a Trump administration is to face the Republicans, but also to face the Democratic Party internally. How does the DNC change? What did we see during the primary? How do we make the party a party of unity for everyone in this country? And how do we move a progressive agenda forward? These are all questions that internally the Democratic Party needs to answer to.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Wendy. Really appreciate having you.
Thank you. And for more information, you can go to votewendycarrillo.com and get informed on my campaign and the issues that we care about.
Excellent. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you.
Continuing this conversation about the Trump administration's tough new stance on immigration, let's turn now to Leslie Sanchez, former executive director for White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans, contributor to CBS News live streams channel, and one of the nation's 100 most influential Hispanics, according to Hispanic Business Magazine. She joins me from Houston, Texas. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you.
So, Leslie, you just heard Wendy in the last segment discuss her thoughts, the panic that the Hispanic community is feeling as she goes door to door working on her congressional candidacy. What are your thoughts on those memos that came out this week and the Hispanic community's reaction?
Sure. I think Wendy has it exactly right, and she certainly is on the front lines speaking to the community every day, but you don't have to go door to door to feel the tension that is created not only within the Hispanic community, but any immigrant community throughout the United States. You have some areas, for example, in Florida that are 55% foreign born, and the conversation is certainly front and center at what the ramifications of this are. And it really, to put it into context, it reminds me back in 1986 when Congress passed and President Reagan at the time signed that big immigration reform, Simpson-Mazzoli, that people said was amnesty for 3 million individuals. But Ronald Reagan had a line that said, "We hope future generations will see that we tried to humanely enforce and get control of our borders." So fast forward, this is exactly the opposite of that. It is not seen as a humane way, though there's a reason for this. It's not a humane way to address a real problem.
So as the incredible Republican strategist that you are, you look at voter trends, you look at messaging and branding of the different policy proposals. What do you see this as doing to the actual Republican Party? How can they re-message this, or do they have to retool the policy in order not to lose all the Hispanics from whether it's the upcoming midterms or the next presidential election?
Sure. This has been a really big issue, and a lot of Republicans have been twisting in the wind on this for a long time. And we go back over 3 decades. Any major immigration reform in this country has been because of the blood and sweat of Republicans leading it. But the tide turned. I talked about that immigration reform law after '86. It quadrupled the number of undocumented coming into this country because there were not good workforce provisions. That was really kind of loosey-goosey in terms of how employers were able to validate false counterfeit credentials. If you had a false passport or a Social Security card or some sort of ID. And you're hearing now stories of people using fake Social Security numbers. That is a cottage industry that started after these reforms in '86 and escalated as more and more people were coming to meet a labor demand. So as Republicans or free market Republicans have argued we need free market solutions that can balance legal labor with the demands of a growing economy. But how do we do that? And if you ask people if they have a choice between coming here legally or illegally, they're going to pick legal unless they're moving some sort of contraband. That's where law enforcement should be focused. So do they pay taxes? They pay they pay consumption taxes. Many people are paying false taxes under false Social Security numbers. There's certainly an economy that goes on with these undocumented individuals, and Republicans and most businesses recognize that.
Well, Leslie, stay right there. We'll have more politicking right after the break. to Politicking. I'm Laura Schwartz, in for Larry King. We're talking about Donald Trump's approach to illegal immigration, as well as the Trump administration's first 30 days on the world stage. I'm talking with Leslie Sanchez, former executive director for White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for Hispanic Americans, and a great contributor to CBS News' live stream channel. Leslie, right before the break, we were talking about the messaging from the Republicans and how this is really hurting the Republican Party as a whole and almost creating them as a minority party. These have been 30 very active days by the Trump administration, this being just the last announcement recently. How are the rest of those 30 days that the president just went through impacting the Republican Party as a whole?
Sure, there's a lot of nail biting. I'll guarantee you that. You know, there was a hope that there would be a cadence that the Republican, you can call it the establishment, but that Washington and the Republican leadership could really grab hold of and start moving some big ticket items, major tax reform, reducing corporate taxes, you know, obviously the Affordable Care Act, you know, now do we replace, what do we do? Now that's not even on the table. Instead, there's kind of been this flurry of executive orders to meet campaign promises, but there's not the solid depth that needs to go into those policy ideas, and we've seen the ramifications of that. It's a very disrupted environment, very disruptive on Capitol Hill, and it's hard to tether to one block or idea that Republicans can lean on as they start thinking about midterm elections, because there's a lot of sweating bullets already on Capitol Hill that this is going to be a very difficult time if they can't move on some of those big ticket items.
And those big ticket items are what really sold a lot of his base during the election, even though the executive orders have helped solidify that base among some polls. But it'll be very interesting because when you see those last 30 days, not only of what you mentioned, but there have been a lot of leaks coming out, especially as this fight between Trump and the intelligence agencies continues. And, you know, he's had some stumbles in the national security arena. And who do you think is going to, you know, win this feud between Trump and the intelligence community?
Well, I do believe the president will get a hold of that. I came into this, like many Republicans, giving the benefit of the doubt. Let's see how the administration starts to cohesively come together. But then there's a lot of missing pieces, like you're talking about. The hundreds of individuals, Senate-confirmed individuals that have not only been not selected, interviewed, or, you know, basically started any hearings on the Hill, who can start moving into the federal agencies that can really execute on some of these ideas, because right now they're just kind of ideas floating in the wind and causing a lot of PR damage, but not necessarily a positive residual on that. That's going to be the challenge. And as there is this uneasiness, you will continue to see those leaks. The difference is, I do think the president's going to have a stronger and stronger command of his executive office, and these are kind of growing pains that are very normal. It's just unfortunate because of this 2 to 4 second tweet cycle. We're all living through that sausage making together.
So what does the political capital mean for not just President Trump, but the Democratic Party as a whole? We've seen in town halls recently people standing up to the Republican members of Congress back in their districts saying things like, do your job. So what do you assess of those, the GOP leaders doing their job? Are they effectively, you know, skirting the problems that President Donald Trump has had in the first 30 days, or can they survive?
I do believe this will all shake out and balance out over some of these rough waters. Part of this is understanding a new way of working with a new president, guiding that process along, and really kind of showing him the clock, that we're running out of time in terms of how long it takes to move major legislation forward. Once some bigger items are successfully moved on Capitol Hill, it's going to give a lot more breathing room, and a lot of this will move to the wayside. But right now, it's extremely uncomfortable. And as the Republican leaders I speak to, they are certainly looking to find a way to keep the coalition together on the Republican side, much less having those conversations about the Democrats. I think the Democrats are wise to understand that these populist movements, you have a lot of independent voters who don't necessarily or they more so dismiss the style and the bravado of Trump if he will get something done. So it starts coming down to what legislation can be passed and signed within the next 6 to 7 months.
Well, Leslie, we've seen the first 30 days. I'm sure we'll be checking in after 30 and 30 and 30 more. So, Leslie, thank you for joining us. And by the way, you can follow Leslie on Twitter under the handle @LeslieSanchez. By now, you've likely heard of the story of controversial journalist, author, and former senior editor for Breitbart News, Milo Yiannopoulos. He rapidly and very publicly fell from the alt-right's grace over a recently unearthed video in which he gave some very disturbing comments on pedophilia. He reached great heights as one of the most visible faces of the so-called alt-right movement, which many claim espouses hate speak against women and other cultures. But unlike in the past, Yiannopoulos currently finds himself on his own, even without the help of the man who reportedly discovered him, current White House chief strategist and former Breitbart executive chairman, Steve Bannon. The Wrap's Itai Haad has covered the story extensively and joins me now on set. By the way, he'll be pretty busy this weekend covering all things Oscar alongside his colleagues at The Wrap, and we'll talk about that shortly. Welcome, Itai.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to start with Milo Yiannopoulos because, as we mentioned, it's been very quiet at the White House. No tweets, no standing up for him by Steve Bannon, his former boss. So why do you think they've remained so silent on this?
It's interesting, right? Because we know that he has been defended. I mean, he's got the president's ear. We know that Bannon was the guy who discovered him. He's said so many, many times.
Yeah, I think he calls Donald Trump Daddy Trump.
He does. He's called him Daddy Trump even before the election. That was sort of his nickname, and has joked about how he finds him very attractive. Yeah, I mean, before, we've seen a different sort of shift right now, because when that whole thing happened with Berkeley University, where they were about to, they were having him as a speaker, and then they canceled on him, and there was a big tweet from Donald Trump saying that he might defund Berkeley because of that. That tweet never came this time around.
Right.
And we know that Bannon was the guy who discovered him and has been there, you know, when he published all those outrageous headlines. There were headlines like, would you prefer your kid had feminism or cancer, you know, those types of headlines. So we were waiting to see, was there going to be a tweet? Was there going to be anyone saying anything in his defense? This time there was nothing.
Yeah, crickets.
Yeah.
And he lost his book deal with Simon & Schuster. That was supposed to be a very large, equitable book deal.
Yeah, about 250,000, I believe.
That's pretty good. That's pretty big. Now, what do you see for his future? I know that what he wants to plan his own media company.
Yeah, he sort of mentioned that during his press conference when he essentially resigned from Breitbart. We know that there's, he claims that there's going to be another publisher that's already interested. We don't know who that publisher might be. I can tell you that I spoke to people at Simon & Schuster, and they told us that that this was sort of one of those things where there was a lot of outrage within Simon & Schuster when this deal was announced. A lot of people were unhappy with it. It'll be interesting to see who takes that chance and that risk, because obviously whoever signs Milo Yiannopoulos for this deal will get some backlash for sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch his future bringings. But I'm more excited to watch the future of the Oscars that are coming up this weekend here in Los Angeles. Now, some people are predicting this will be the most politically charged Oscars, Academy Awards ever. I mean, we saw the Golden Globes, Meryl Streep spoke out. The Critic Choice Awards were just a total political platform. What are you expecting to see Oscar night this coming Sunday?
Well, we already know that one of the big agencies has canceled their after-hours Oscar party, right? Because usually after these events, there's like parties all over town, and whoever is part of UTA, which is the agency, will go to their party. They've canceled it. Instead, decided to donate $250,000 to the ACLU, which ostensibly would be more than what a regular party would cost. They also started a source crowding campaign that's garnered already more than $280,000. So they're using this opportunity to sort of make a statement. Also, UTA, this hit them quite close to home, because one of their clients, which is Asghar Farhadi, who's an Iranian director who's nominated for Best Foreign Film this year, he was directly affected by that ban. There was a moment where we weren't sure whether he'd be able to even come to Hollywood to participate in the ceremony. He has announced he will not be going, but we know from a tweet that he said that he was in tears when he heard that UTA was going to cancel their party to make this kind of statement. They're holding a rally right outside their premise. Already I've seen hundreds of people who've RSVP'd on their Facebook page, so it'll be interesting to see what happens on Friday.
Well, it's neat to see the activism, you know, with United Talent Agency representing so many of the big names in Hollywood, take as much of a stand as some of those people are going to take on the stage in their acceptance speeches. Are you expecting a lot of mentions of Trump or indirect mentions of Donald Trump that night?
Isn't that the big question? That's the one thing we always want to know, because there's always been sort of like that feeling among some people in Hollywood that when you accept an award, just accept the award, say thank you, thank a few people, and get off the stage.
Thanks, Mom and Dad. Thanks, before the music starts playing you off.
Right, and there was a lot of backlash towards some of the people who have received Oscars in the past, who have used that platform for their political ideas and ideology. This time around, I don't think that's the case. Hollywood has been extremely resistant to Donald Trump and has used their platform in order to make their point. We saw that with Meryl Streep. I expect that's going to happen again this time around. It'll be interesting to see who does what. I think that's going to be part of the anticipation of watching this show.
I think it's going to be one of many drinking games people are playing at home, quite honestly, Itai. It really is something, though, because when Meryl Streep mentioned that, you know, at the Golden Globes, it was very well said, very sophisticated. The Committee to Protect Journalists saw an increase in fundraising that night alone.
Thousands and thousands of dollars.
Well,
yeah, I think it was a few dozen thousands of dollars. They did really, really well, and I thought that was a really eloquent speech as well. Yeah, she really, Meryl Streep really made, you know, a stand there. She took a really good stand, and people were very impressed by it, I think, in Hollywood. So I think there's definitely going to be some people anticipating to see who among the stars this time around will pull off a Meryl Streep.
I think the stars are going to be hoping that they're the one that Donald Trump is going to tweet the next day. So Meryl Streep, I think, set the bar at the Golden Globes. Well, Itai, along with you and all the great folks at The Wrap, we're going to watch what's to come. Get the latest from Itai. Check out his reporting at thewrap.com or follow him at Twitter at Itai Hod, ITAYHOD. Thanks for joining me on this edition of Politicking, and thanks for Larry King letting me sit in his beautiful chair and by his microphone and suspenders today. We love hearing from you out there in the audience, so please join the conversation on Larry's Facebook page. And as always, you can share your thoughts on Twitter by tweeting at KingsThings and using the Politicking hashtag. I'll also invite you to join me on Twitter at Laura Schwartz. So that's all for this edition, and welcome back next time of Politicking.